Have you ever heard of Titania? Oh, sure, you've probably heard the name used before in various fictional media. In Warframe, Titania is the name of a frame that can shrink and fly around at high speed, sending out winged drones to tear apart her foes. Titania is a nickname given to Urza Scarlet, the most powerful woman in the Fairy Tale Guild, who wields hundreds of sets of weapons and armor with perfect skill. The name is used quite often, but do you know where it came from? How about Oberon? It's the name of another Warframe known to possess healing, support, and offensive abilities that can suit any situation and bring victory to its allies. In the cartoon Gargoyles, Oberon is the son of Queen Mab, father of Merlin, and ruler of Avalon and the Third Race. Oberon is not quite as commonly referenced as Titania, but you aren't likely to see Oberon's name in any story where Titania isn't also at least mentioned. Often, they're together, such as in Shin Megami Tensei, where they are two of the highest-ranked demons of the Fairy race, and they're said to be married. So, who were the original Titania and Oberon? I'm Lorekeeper Wilveren, and today we'll be delving into Celtic folklore and myth to find out. First off, I just want to say that it's rather difficult to find solid sources for the pronunciation of Gaelic words, so I do hope I'm pronouncing them correctly, but please forgive me if I'm not. Titania and Oberon are the queen and king of the fairies. Surely you've heard of fairies. They're one of the most common and easily recognized of all fantasy creatures. Fairy tale is, after all, synonymous with a fantasy story, at least in common use. That said, fairies may not be exactly what you think they are. Don't get me wrong, the idea of a small, winged partner who supports me with their magical powers and a cheerful personality is great. I love fairies as they're portrayed in modern media and video games. But to really understand Titania and Oberon, we'll need to first gain a better understanding of the true origins of fairies. Much of Irish folklore was passed down orally, and given their superstitious culture, it's historically been a bit difficult to get solid information on things like fairies. As such, there's some confusion and debate as to the origin of fairies, but there are two primary origin stories. One, stemming from Abrahamic traditional belief, is that the fairies are actually fallen angels who were not sinful enough to be condemned to hell, but were too sinful to remain in heaven. Pagan traditional belief suggests that fairies are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, which translates to Tribe of Danu. Danu is an ancient ancestral goddess in Irish paganistic belief and is seen as the mother of all the different fairy races. Oddly enough, the existence of Danu is sort of a theoretical reconstruction. No deity named Danu has ever been specifically mentioned in historical texts and stories, despite the tribe said to be descended from her. Imagine hearing something like Lisa's family, but never hearing or seeing anything anywhere about a person named Lisa. It's possible that the goddess Anu is an alternate name for Danu as well, given the similarity of their names and a few other details, but no one knows for sure. Regardless of which origin story you go with, fairies are generally mysterious, mischievous creatures who are very close to nature. Most are said to live underground, beneath fairy circles or special hills or ancient monuments dedicated to them, or in hawthorn trees. It's also believed that fairies live in a sort of parallel spiritual dimension next to ours, which is why you don't see them walking around in the places they're said to live, though they can cross over when they want, and even take humans over to their side. Most are very small, stunningly beautiful, territorial, and capable of a wide range of blessings or curses depending on whether they are properly respected. They can bless fields and homes, give that extra bit of luck someone needs to be successful or avoid disaster, or they can curse you and your family with the opposite type of luck, leave fields barren and dead, give a family sickness, or any number of other unpleasant things. Fairies may choose to abduct a person, sometimes an adult and sometimes a newborn child, and replace them with a fairy lookalike called a changeling. A changeling is generally a fairy that is disfigured or mentally deficient in some way, and the fairies will kidnap the human to replace them, and through magic, make the changeling look exactly like the person who is taken. To have a changeling in one's midst is said to bring all sorts of bad luck and cause dangerously bad things to happen. The lore surrounding changelings and the actions taken by people to get rid of them and bring the original person back gets pretty dark. Let's just say it's not unheard of for someone to have died a horrible death at the hands of their own families after they were suspected of being replaced by a changeling. No one wants to incur the wrath of the fairies, and even to this day, Irish citizens are careful not to disturb or harm what they believe to be fairy grounds, and to leave offerings such as milk, bread, and berries for the little folk. Yes, little folk, also called the good folk, the fair folk, or just the folk. It's rare for anyone who believes to say the true name of the fairies, the Aos Shi, or those who live beneath the hill. Some refer to them as she, but this is a bit of a mistranslation, as she is actually the word for the mount or hill they are said to live under and protect. There are also multiple spellings, such as the Scottish spelling Sith. However, the pronunciation does not change. There are all sorts of different fairies, including banshees, lianen-shi, kate-shi, and ku-shi. The pixies of British folklore are seen as being akin to the owls-shi as well, so they too fall under the umbrella term fairy. They aren't generally malevolent, but they are very dangerous when provoked, or are omens of bad things to come. There are things any believer in the fairies knows not to do, such as making bargains with the fairies, damaging or stealing things from known fairy territories, and several other things that are believed to rouse the anger of the fairies. They aren't seen as deities by any means, but they are respected, feared, and revered. So, now that we know a little more about fairies, let's talk about Titania and Oberon. As I said, Titania is the queen of the fairies, and her husband Oberon is the king. As much as this is fairly common knowledge, it actually has no basis in the original belief system, and didn't come from Celtic mythology at all. According to Irish folklore, the queen of the fairies has no name, or at least no name we have ever been able to learn. Same for the king. The name Titania was first used for the fairy queen in 1595 by William Shakespeare in his play A Midsummer Night's Dream. He got the name from a Latin narrative poem called Metamorphosis, created by Publius Ovidius Naso in the year 8 AD, where it was used to refer to the daughters of the Titans. It honestly had nothing to do with fairies before Shakespeare decided to use it, but his influence and the eventual popularity of the story were so great that it stuck, and now practically everyone believes that the fairy queen's true name is Titania. Oberon, as the name of her husband and king of the fairies, originated from A Midsummer Night's Dream as well. His name is said to be derived from the old High Germanic name Alberic, which roughly translates to Elf King, and is the name of a dwarf in Germanic mythology. Before Shakespeare used it, Oberon was used in a 13th century French story, Les Prouesses et Fêtes de Napoléon de Bordeaux, which is really hard to say, and I hope I did it right. In that story, Oberon was a man who was cursed during his christening by an offended fairy to remain a dwarfish height for his entire life. However, the fairies seemed to regret the curse and blessed him with great beauty as compensation, giving rise to an occasionally referenced myth of Oberon appearing to be a very beautiful child that never grows up. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Titania and Oberon are feuding over the fate of a certain baby boy. The child's mother was a mortal friend and follower of Titania, who died giving birth to him. Titania wished to keep and raise the child for her friend's sake, ensuring he would be happy and free to live the life he wanted. Oberon, however, wanted the child to be left to him to raise as a henchman or servant. Being the king and queen of the fairies so closely linked to nature, their feuding affected the weather itself, hindering the production of crops and causing a myriad of problems for the humans. Oberon decided to use a love potion concocted through the juice of a certain flower on Titania, which was said to make the person who drinks it madly dote upon the next living thing that it sees. With Titania distracted by love and the need to lavish her new lover with gifts, Oberon would easily be able to steal and hide away the child. So Oberon sent his servant Puck to retrieve the flower, then he used it on Titania while she slept. The plan worked well, and Titania awoke to see a man named Bottom, who, due to the events of a different story, was cursed to have the head of a donkey by Puck. Throughout the course of the story, other events occur, and Oberon ends up regretting what he has done to his wife, and using a magic herb undoes the effects of the love potion. When Titania wakes, she believes she had a strange dream, but Oberon explains to her that it wasn't a dream and admits to his actions. Titania forgives him, and the two reconcile, again becoming the benevolent king and queen of the fairies they were before this feud started. So, now that you know that the names of Titania and Oberon as the king and queen of the fairies came from a play Shakespeare wrote, how do you feel? Do you feel let down that the names didn't even come from Irish folklore and are just something a writer made up that stuck? Do you feel impressed that a writer from relatively recent times could have made such a profound impact on ancient folklore and how we view it today? Or do you think maybe, just maybe, Shakespeare had a muse that was from the fairy side of things, and it blessed him with knowledge no other mortal had, or at least no one who had been able to share it? Either way, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're confronted with one of the Fae, make sure not to do anything disrespectful. You don't want to be forced to dance until your toes fall off, or have a fairy cat come steal your soul when you're on your deathbed, do you? Obviously, there's a great deal more lore and myth involving fairies that we could talk about, but I wanted to keep this video focused on Titania and Oberon and their origins. If you'd like to know more about fairies or Celtic lore in general, let me know. It's a subject I love, and I'm happy to explore it more. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.